So that's the kind of power that was deployed to cover up not only the Franklin network, but also the Epstein network.
And then like you also described like Craig Spence's house being like wired for video and sound as just like a huge blackmail network where it was just like not just about you know catering to the just like evil predilections of powerful men, but it's also about controlling powerful men. And you described this as kind of an invisible system of like the real system of checks and balances in our government about like like who gets to do what and like who has what on whom.
Yes, actually, I just wrote a blog this morning called "Sexual Political Blackmail: A Time-Honored Tradition in America." And Americans have a very collective naivete about sexual political blackmail. It's disheartening, but it's so absurd, this naivete. I'll give you an example of sexual political blackmail that's never come out, or that's recently come out. Is There was a muckraking journalist who found out that Alexander Hamilton had a 23-year-old mistress who was married, and her husband was shaking Alexander Hamilton down. So this muckraker outed Hamilton, and Hamilton and Jefferson had a lot of antipathy. And this muckraker thought that since he had outed Hamilton's little blackmail and his predilection for this much younger married woman, that Jefferson would certainly give him a political appointment when Jefferson became president. But Jefferson did not, and he nonetheless tried to blackmail Jefferson, and then he outed Jefferson for having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. So sexual political blackmail has been going on forever and ever, and I can give you two examples of guys that were obviously blackmailed. One is Larry Craig. He was a really far right wing guy from Idaho, and he was in Washington D.C. for 25 years. He was there as a representative, and then he was there as a U.S. senator. Now, this guy had a runaway libido. As I said earlier, I wrote a book called Confessions of a D.C. Madam, and Craig was getting male prostitutes from Henry Vincent, who ran this escort service. And then there was a film called Outrage made by Kirby Dick where it showed that Craig was getting escorts from other services too. And then Craig tried to pick up a vice police officer in a bathroom at a Minneapolis airport. Here's an esteemed senator trying to pick up a vice squad cop in an airport. And it's kind of funny. I'm from Minneapolis, and I go home probably once or twice, about once every year or so. And I guess the guy was slapping his foot, and that's kind of a signal
The
for,
wide stance. It was the
yes,
famous
yes.
wide stance.
So I was sitting on the throne, and some guy was slapping his foot on the ground, and I really felt bad for him. I thought he had a neurological disorder, so I, I obviously didn't understand the nuances of that kind of interaction, but Larry Craig certainly did. Now, how could Larry Craig not be compromised? How could he not be compromised? And then to add insult to injury, for us, he had the worst voting record for gay rights, I believe, in the Senate at the time. And then there's Dennis Hastert, our former Speaker of the House. Now, constitutionally, Dennis Hastert was the third most powerful man in the country. If the president goes and the vice president goes, the Speaker of the House takes over. So Dennis Hastert had a history of molesting boys. He had a 40-year history of molesting boys. And there was a FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds who came across some intelligence on Hastert going to a house of ill repute in Chicago while he was Speaker of the House. So the FBI knew what he was up to while he was Speaker of the House. So how could he not be compromised? And it's very interesting when you start digging into this type of stuff.
It might be like kind of a general question and like kind of an impossible one to answer because you really have to get inside the heads of very disparate types of people. But I'm from Chicago, and like everyone in Cook County at least always hated Dennis Hastert. I think like most people ended up agreeing, but The allegations against him from the time he was a wrestling coach to, up until he was speaker, really, surprised me because I don't think anyone in Illinois who didn't know would have pegged him as doing that. It didn't seem true to the type of guy he was, but it turned out to be who he was. But do you think that there is like this is kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, do you think that these guys are most of the time like legitimately pedophiles, like they're legitimately into this, or do you think it's like an exercise of power, like that they're not so much like sexually interested in it, but they're like, okay, I think I'm above everyone in all these ways. What else can I get away with?
I can answer that question to a certain degree. When I was getting into this, when I was working on the Franklin scandal, I got to a blackmail photographer for that network. And I said to him, "How does this work?" He says, "It's like you're on a yacht and it's a beautiful day. And you can have whatever you want on this yacht, whatever you want. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown." So, what he meant by that is that if you're on the yacht, if you're compromised, I mean, I know of examples of compromised politicians where being compromised helped their career exponentially. So that's one thing. I think that to run in today's with today's political system, one almost has to be somewhat pathological. I'm not saying that all our politicians are pathological, but then you add this potent psychological alchemy of lust and power and arrogance, and nothing makes people stupid like lust, power, and arrogance. Nothing. I mean, if you want to see a really smart guy get really stupid, put a beautiful young woman in front of him, and then and then you could just watch it unfold. So I think that some of these guys, Dennis Hastert obviously had been a pedophile for quite some time,
Yeah,
and I think that his pedophilia helped his political career. Like I said, I see that happening with other people because I had to try to get my mind around that too. I didn't understand it. And I talked to a psychologist in Washington, D.C., who works with some of these guys. Most of these guys are completely cool with molesting children, but some of them actually have the pangs of conscience. And she said sometimes it's a forbidden fruit syndrome too, where you've got guys that can eat steak whenever they want. So they ultimately end up going for forbidden fruit. So I hope that that kind of answers your question.
yeah. I mean, I think it's like kind of like an impossible to answer question because you have to do this impossible task of getting inside someone's head, and you have to do it with like hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got sort of interested and like involved in investigating this, like really this odyssey of evil and corruption? I mean, the it's like sort of the book, like the entry point to it is when you were sort of intrigued by an editor or publisher to start looking into like satanic cults and things like that, and you became across this group called the Finders. Could you talk about the Finders and like how that was like your sort of entry point into Franklin Credit?
Okay, so here's what happened. I was speaking to a Rolling Stone editor one day, and he said, "Pitch me dark stories." And, I just kind of reflexively threw my hands up in the air and said, Nazi, Satanist. My next step was going to be werewolves and vampires. I didn't know where it was coming from. And then there was that little glint